All right, welcome everyone. Welcome. We're really excited today. We have Rodrigo Delaveau, who's been a law professor for more than 20 years at the Universidad Católica de Chile. He's legal counsel in public law affairs at Morales and Besa in Santiago, Chile. In 2019, he was elected Deputy Justice for the Constitutional Court of Chile for a 3-year term. And he received his JD and LLM degree summa cum laude from the Universidad Católica de Chile. His LLM and PhD from the University of Chicago Law School, where he also lectures on comparative con law. So we're excited to welcome him today to talk about the constitutional reform process in Chile. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Diego. Thank you, Catherine, for the really warm welcome. Very welcome, actually. We're coming out of a very freezing Chilean winter, okay, so that will be great. Usually you start this kind of, lunch talk saying, well, I can't find the words to say thank you for you. But I actually can, which is I do feel at home, right? In California, just like central Chile. I mean, the mountains are exactly the same, the trees are the same, the dry weather stays the same, no moisture in the air. That's fantastic. So thank you so much for just having that feeling and only the warm welcome. We also share kind of exotic taste and behavior for earthquakes, right? I mean, none of us, both people from California and Chileans, we don't move a muscle unless it's over 7.0 in the Richter, right, scale, right? Everything under that is just keep doing whatever you think you're doing. So if this, happens, you don't have to kind of pretend. We all know why you're here. Those amazing burritos are really awesome. So don't pretend on me at all. And I'm so interested in that. However, talking about earthquakes, well, we have our own constitutional thing happening in the past 3 years. I was going first with the word, sorry, where's the clicker? Somewhere? There you go, thank you. With the word autopsy, but probably it's too strong for that. So a forensic analysis will be more, adequate for trying to solve what happened. This rare process, you may know, 264 constitutions have been subject to a referendum, popular referendum, and only 6% of them have been rejected, which is very unusual. Since 1798 in the Netherlands, that was the first, and the last one was this one, about a month ago. Actually, a month ago, yeah, it was September 4th. But what was the first time ever in our history, world history, that a document, a draft coming out of a convention, elected convention, democratic elected convention, was rejected. So that was a kind of really big surprise for everyone. So let's see, let's try to figure out what happened. Let's do it. We're all probably very familiar with this. I worked together with Tom Ginsberg at the Comparative Constitutional Project. So we might be familiar that now there's one constitution per country. Constitution seems to come in waves, right? So we had this first wave, 19th century, probably, the Americas going independent. Second wave after World War II, and third wave after the Berlin Wall and Eastern Europe thing. So at the moment we have 196 constitution there over the top. But constitutions are costly to make, right? Not only in terms of financially, and that explains why the amounts of amendments are 3 times the amounts of new constitutions in the world. Because they're costly. They're drafted during, after war periods, civil war, invasions, a big crisis, right? So it's very common that when a new constitution is designed, is a very rough period for that country. So after World War II, we kind of realized that probably it's better to get an amendment rather than a new constitution, because they cost so much in terms of socially, in terms of politics. People going against each other because they have different views about what should be or should not be in the Constitution. If you go back, tracking to the Chilean history, so we have a lot of experimentation since our independence in 1810, right, until 1833. This is a very kind of Latin American thing. Oh, we're going to do something that it's going to last forever, and it lasts like a year, right? And then our first, non-permanent constitution lasted like almost 100 years, which is the 1833 Constitution. Then we have the 1925, also after a political crisis, and then the 1980 Constitution, which is the current one, and subject to be replaced by this process. So going first through this idea of constitutional rigidity is also part of endurance of the Constitution. Jefferson said, well, a Constitution should be should last like for a generation. A generation, late 19th century was 19 years old, right? That was one generation. And that is exactly the average, worldwide for a Constitution to last. Don't ask. There's anyone from Dominican Republic? No? Okay, the average for that would be 14. Every Dominican has experienced, within their lifespan, 14 constitutions. So they don't last much, right? So I didn't put like every single country in the world, but rigidity has a lot to do with endurance. So the average is two-thirds of the body in charge of changing the Constitution, like, usually the Congress, right? Like one house or two houses, two-thirds. Chile will be there because about 5 chapters of the Constitution is two-thirds, and the other 10 are 3/5. That has recently changed. So USA is up there. You might know it's 2/3, but it's 3/4 of the states. So probably when it was designed, 13 states. Well, that was achievable. With 50 states, not so flexible. However, most of the discussions that you guys have at a state level, it's probably bending, a little bit that analysis, because most of the countries in the world are not federalist, not federal. So you just put the essential thing in the federal constitution, and the rest of the issues at the constitutional level goes at a state level. That doesn't happen in most of the countries. So that is why you have this kind of graphic, and then you have the emblematic, the polished constitution, which is unamendable. That's it. They don't care. You just can't change it, right? So what happened in the 42 years since 1980? Well, a lot of things happened, of course. Now, funny enough, 42 years is the lifespan, the life endurance of a constitution in stable democratic countries, not 19 years. This was drafted during the Pinochet years. So that is one of the things we're going to talk about. I'm not going into politics, but just getting you, general frame. However, between 1989, when democracy, started again, till 2021, 61 amendment bills were made to the Constitution. I actually have a document right now with different colors, and it was amended in 257 provisions. All of the chapters have been amended during democracy with a democratic process. Only 22 articles remain, the same as the original text approved in 1980. Things like, I don't know, Chile is a democratic republic. I mean, nothing that you will discuss with your grandma about, right? No, nothing really controversial. Out of 143, which is the number of articles that we have in our Constitution. Now, if you try to trace back what they're called the sticky rules of Constitution, what remains in a constitutional tradition, this is kind of counterintuitive, where 60% of the text of the Chilean Constitution remains probably designed within a democratic period, which is 1989 until, right now. Only 17% of the text remains the same as it was designed or approved during the Pinochet years, and the 23%, it comes from past constitutions. So that's how the texts are being, traced back. So how about this process? Well, you might be familiar that in October 2019, there was a lot of social unrest, riots in the streets, people, claiming for very different things, like, pensions, health system, education, many things that were kind of social demands, okay? This lasted for a month, 2 months. The pressure was big, and both executive and Congress came to agreement and say, well, we need to replace the Constitution in order to, channel this whole demands and probably get a new one. So that happened in December 2019, where they designed within the Constitution, the 1980 Constitution, the process for getting a new one, okay? So we have this hourglass design, right? Where, in the top of the thing you have a lot of democratic participation. So we have an entry referendum, right? 79% of the people vote we should have a new constitution. Okay, that's clear. Signed 79% is quite big. Then you get to the conventional election. That's how they call this, this body, 155 people that were supposed to draft the text of the new constitution. And then, the hourglass opens again, and then you have to approve it by exit referendum, okay? So that would be the things, happening in a timeline. So April 2021, rings any bell? What was happening right there? COVID, right? So COVID would be another character, in this play. So the convention begins July 4th, kind of familiar date, right? 2021, and the July 5th. So 1 year for drafting the Constitution. Convention ends September 4th, exit referendum. That was the itinerary, how things were supposed to be. But what happened in between? Between the entry referendum and the actual election? Well, two things. First, COVID. How is this relevant? We will get into this in a moment. And constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendment in the sense that Congress was still in power to amend the current Constitution. So they say, well, if we are, electing special body for drafting the Constitution, it seems like the public demand of the interest of people, in the streets or whatever this group of interests are, pushing for, it's gender parity. Gender parity, okay, so we will have to design a system where, the 155 member committee, it's, half women, half men. Okay, that's one. Number two, they alter also the rules for democratic election in terms of indigenous people. So indigenous people would have 17 reserve seats. So that will be about a little less, about 12% of the on the convention. We have about 10% of our population, self-declare themselves as indigenous people, so that will reflect, in a special seats or reserved seats within the convention. And that was it. Okay. Also, one thing that I kind of was skipping, and independence. Independence, participation, everyone embraced this. We're not only following with the regular, political parties, and you can also run as independent groups, okay, like a bunch of citizens that gather, and we can run for being in the convention. So at that moment, so far so good. We had the election in April 2021, and of course they took, as you might imagine, 6 months for just getting the rules, for getting the rules, right? That's usually what happens with humans. That would take a long time for just agreeing on what the rules should be for making a rule. Okay. And we had the product at the end of the convention in July 5th. So let's go with a big, you say data or data? That? Okay, sorry, my English is not that good anyway. So almost 53,000 words. Is this long? Is this much? Not too much? Well, at least if you put all the constitutions one by one, side by side, we would have been in the number 11th in the world in terms of length. Is it length important? It's just a bunch of words. Well, at least, the common sense, you would say it's easier to agree in the less than to agree in the more. A lot of people may criticize, a U.S. Constitution, it's just too brief. 7,000 words. Actually, 7,700 words. It's not the shorter in the world. It's shorter in the way. It's the Monaco Constitution with 2,000 words, anyway. Biggest, India. Second biggest, Bolivia. Third, Ecuador. So that might say, well, okay, number of words might be a thing, but also scope and depth. I mean, how many areas will be covered by the Constitution, and in what depth would that be? For example, the Bolivian Constitution, there's a lot of big scope there, for example, in education, but they also say what should be taught at the 4th grade level. Don't worry, they also say what should be taught in the 5th grade level. So don't worry about that. But so there are two different things, how the ocean, how big is the ocean, how deep is the ocean of the constitutional draft. And in number of rights, we're all the way number 1. So we passed from having 46, which is the world average. By the way, I don't know, we have this kind of middle class vocation. We are in the middle of every single thing in the world, right? We are just in the middle of everything, in terms of average. So you can call it Chile's like the middle class, example, right in the middle with 46 rights. Number 1 would be Ecuador with 99 so far. No surprise there that in the 25 countries with more constitutional rights in their text, more than half of them are in Latin America. Like, we like it that in Latin America to have a lot of rights. That's one of the things we embrace. Just bring me a paper and you can have the rights. It's so easy, right? Just write it down and that's it. So that will be the numbers in terms of rights. So the work started actually with the drafting in January this year. Some articles, some provisions start leaking out of the convention. It was an open process, in the middle of social media, people tweeting, the conventions tweeting, when they were in the middle of the committee or in the plenum voting. So there was a lot of information, very transparent. So one of the definitions this was in the draft. Chile is a social and democratic rule of state. Nothing new there. we were always like a very rule of law country. Social and democratic, okay, that's the way that Spanish people took, or Italy, also Swedish people, and many European countries. So plurinational, yeah, that's a little bit exotic. Only Ecuador and Bolivia has this idea, which, in two words, they say, well, the indigenous people that were before the Spanish people here were nations, okay? As the modern concept of nation, it's more like a sociological approach rather than a law approach, right? So it's made, Chile is made of a lot of nationals, or different nationalities. This was created by a Spanish law professor who first sold the idea to Chavez in Venezuela, right? Then to Ecuador, and then to Bolivia, that countries are formed by this plurinational thing. Intercultural, that was new. Ecological state, we really did not know how to define that, wasn't defined. Solidarity in terms of inter-solidarity within regions. Regions is your equivalent to states, okay? So the poor states have, the rich states have to contribute to the poor states, and paritarian democracy. Probably easier to implement, to enforce in democratic elected bodies, such as Congress or councils. Not so easy to implement in technical bodies, such as courts, such as Supreme Court, such as central bank. How would parity would play out there? How would you elect that? How would that be designed? So that was a little murky or blurry. So for designing the executive, okay, so presidential system, nothing new about it. 4-year term. For our first time since 150 years, re-election. We never had re-election ever since 1850. But 27 new agencies, bureaucratic agencies, were created. Right? This is a big bunch. I mean, we are a small country, just 18 million people. 27 new regulatory agencies and systems and bureaucratic organs that were designed in various different types of. And then we have the territorial organization with autonomous regions, counties, indigenous territorial autonomies. We don't have reservations, right? But this was the idea that, okay, there's certain indigenous people and they should be granted land for free in certain areas that are not yet defined but have to be defined in the future, and we will have to give them this territory and some special territories like, I don't know, the Antarctica and something like that, right? In terms of the legislative, it was a big departure from our constitutional tradition. We have, like U.S., like two houses, Senate and the so-called House of Deputies instead of representatives. And we went unicameral, right? So probably if one of the things that we're aiming, the convention was aiming, was decentralized. We are highly centralized in terms of population. Like Santiago concentrated between 40 and 50% of the population in Chile, right? Now it should be like 7 million city in terms of population. So how can you reconcile that if you're only representing, the amount of people, just population, and not the other regions, with reserved seats for indigenous people? And there's going to be a kind of more than a chamber or a house. It's like a council of these regions with limited powers only in certain issues such as constitutional amendment, justice system, legislative power, bodies, taxes, etc. Right? That would be the idea. So very much in the fashion of Ecuador and Bolivia and Venezuela about they do it. Huge change in the judiciary. They changed what used to be called the judicial power or the judiciary and changed that for the judicial systems in plural. So there should be like one national system. I will assume that national is the Chilean one, because if this is plurinational, then every single judicial system is national from the indigenous people that are within that nationality. With the regular, Court of Appeal, 17 courts of appeal, and then, first, basic judges in civil law, in criminal law, and labor law, whatever. It's the field. And then you have one system per indigenous people, right? For the Mapuche, the Aymara, the Rapa Nui, that's the people from the Easter Island, the Quechua, the Atacameños, Yagán, Cahuéscar, Coya, and Dieguita. But the thing is that, for example, the Mapuche people, they're like 1 million, okay? And the Cahuéscar people, the Chango people are 4,000. So, the asymmetry is quite big. And none of them had previously to that a judicial system. Prior to that, they do not have a system for administration, for implementing justice within their, use or whatever they, how to say that, sus costumbres.
Customs?
Yeah, customs, okay. They never had that because we're mostly, mixed race country. The Mapuches, 80% of the Mapuches, they live in cities, right? They don't live in, in rural areas. So it was all to be designed, in the future by statute or how these systems would be implemented. And then we have the Constitutional Court. Right now we have a constitutional tribunal, very in the fashion as Europe. Actually, the Constitutional Court plays the role as your Supreme Court. It's out of the bureaucracy of the judicial system. It has the constitutional review against mostly statutes that are against the Constitution. And they have, as usually happen with the Constitutional Court, preventive judicial review. Why? Because civil law countries do not have, the precedent system. Okay, so that's the different model from Kelsen, designed in 1920 for constitutional courts only specialized in judicial review in constitutional matters. So if you get to the text, indigenous, people were kind of a big thing. So they have 10 exclusive rights, reserved seat in legislative and national, regional, local government, and some technical agencies, autonomy and self-government. They have this preferential mechanism for reparation of public utility, to have the land of their own. Prior to that, it has to be, taken from someone and give them to the indigenous people. But the most controversial issue was here regarding the consent. There's the international work. I wonder what's the three-letter in English. In Spanish, la OIT, the International Work Organization, something like that. It's in Switzerland, right? Okay. No.
ILO. Yeah, it's ILO.
Yeah, right, the ILO. Thank you. So, and have this international treaty, the 169 treaty, which is, if you are doing anything, you have to ask your indigenous people. And that's all over our legislation and statute. However, the draft moved one step forward and say, well, you also need the consent. So that gives them veto power. And the veto power was not granted to the territories, but was granted to the people. So this became kind of controversial. I mean, part of the, I don't know, Chango people, right? And I live in downtown Santiago, and they're building, I don't know, a highway somewhere, and nobody asked me, and I have to give them consent to build that because it's affecting my rights as an indigenous people. So it was not granted to the territory, but as to the people. So regular Chileans didn't have any, neither consulting nor consent right towards anything that should be or wanted to be, developed, or in terms of, I don't know, a park, an energy station or whatever. So that was kind of controversial, giving them this veto power. Other economic issue, property rights. We have a very strong legacy of protecting property rights, and usually when government takes property from you, you are paid with the market value price of what has been taken. That is called the patrimonial damage actually caused. That's the way usually it's in our constitutions. I mean, previous to that, and that was replaced by fair price, which is more vague concept, gives more discretion to the judge. Maybe it's more than market price, maybe it's less than market price. We don't know, but it actually attacks some of the certainty. And the other thing was the economic freedom, right? General rule, you can do whatever you want unless it's regulated by Congress. However, now that was changed to the content and limits, right, of the right. It's not undertake, it's like entrepreneurship. Sorry, bad translation there. Shall be determined by the legislation. So freedom is not the default rule anymore. If you wanted to go in an activity that is not being pre-regulated by the legislator, you just can't do it, right? Which is altering the rule. And for a small country that has virtually no internal market power, and then 80% of their economy is just exporting things. I mean, we just would not be able to live unless there's a world out there that can just buy our products. This was a big issue. So also in health, social security, labor, union regulations, things start to get a little bit, not slippery slope, but they say, well, we are moving now from a very diverse social security system to a single public social system. Same thing with the health system. Workers used to have the right for making the collective bargain. You may be in the union or out of the union, you have the right for that. Now, in the draft, they say, no. Unions are the only one with the monopoly of collective bargain. No surprise there, workers start saying, oh, they deprive our right to do the collective bargain. Now I have to be unionized in order to get to the collective bargain. Surprisingly, unions didn't like it at all. You may say, why? They were granted with this new power of exclusive negotiation of the collective rights. Why? Well, because if their only way for negotiating is to be in the union, probably there will be many unions in my company. So I will have, to compete with the other unions. So even unions didn't like that provision. That's if you, I can email you the draft, whatever you want to see. So many areas were started to be included in the draft: energy, infrastructure, farming, elimination of water rights, elimination, just like that, telecommunications, real estate, development, how mining should be done. So a lot of things that are not usually in the Constitution start to be adding in this Constitution. And this is, why was this? Well, even you need the 2/3 of the convention for getting something into the Constitution. When transaction costs are low, well, then that's everything, right? It's no barrier at all for putting things into the Constitution. So constitutional rights start expanding. Right to sport, didn't like that at all. Probably I do like the second one, right to leisure. That was about my favorite, right? Everyone has the right to rest, leisure, and enjoy free time. Animals and nature has rights subject to protection. Farmers were not very keen about this one, right? So, of course, people, the fishing activity came concerned. So, how do we need to make fishing? And people from poultry and any other activity that might involve animals or nature by the same rule. So we start adding a lot of adjectives to social rights. Of course we have right to a social system, social pension system, right to health, right to education, but we start adding the convention start adding decent housing and adequate housing. And this is not just wishful thinking. I mean, you can just add whatever you want in the Constitution. It's a kind of, okay, we were sometime at a certain point of development, we will reach that. The problem is that everything was transformed into a remedy, the recurso de tutela, when you can actually go before a court of law and demand that your house has to be decent and adequate. And this is applied to 132 constitutional rights. This is Thomas' words. These are not mine. They say, well, if you're granting judges with social, political policies, then it's regressive. Because poor people don't go to court. This is why we give social rights to legislators. They're much more efficient to reaching poor people for housing, for education, for health. But if you're only giving this to the ones that are going to court, you're just giving middle class, upper middle class the entitlement for getting this kind of not rights, but the adjectives of right. How adequate, how decent should be a house for being a constitutional right. So what happened? What happened with what can explain this very extended text? And I'm not even getting into the behavior of the convention itself, which is kind of also controversial. They replicate actually the same system that we used to have in the lower house and the House of Deputies. However, election made in the middle of the COVID pandemic, so only healthy people, usually like younger people, show up. None of the people over 45 show up because of the COVID risks. So that altered a little bit the pattern, the historic pattern of behavior of the voter. It was at the same time we vote for mayors, governors, regional councilors, and local councilors. So there were 5 votes. It's like a big sheet like this size. You would just do what I'm voting for here is for the convention, is for the mayor. People were not clear about what they were voting, probably. Participation was 41.51. That's not bad, actually, for voluntary vote. That's kind of reasonable. And we have this thing about the 17 reserve seats. The problem with this is that a lot of the indigenous people, the asymmetry of how their of what their vote represent, it was dramatic. One of the Kawashker people got 92 votes, and that was enough for getting a seat. But the average for, any convention that has been elected, let's say in Valparaiso was 60,000 votes. Both got the same seat. There's one candidate that got more votes than than all 17 indigenous people votes. So when you start tinkering with, some democratic basic principles, maybe the outcome will say you something. Not at this point, but let's see how the text came out. So less than 2%. So less than 2% of the constituency voted. That was the problem. Although between 10 and 12% of the Chilean population identifying themselves as indigenous people. So let's go back to the right itinerary. So this is what happened, and let's go to the election day. I call it the prequel. I know it sounds, you're another Star Wars fan, whatever. But it's the best place to explain. So this is the day of the election, okay? So it looks like a myriad, like a bundle of, different colors. I love especially the smiley faces, right? That's kind of reinforcing, wow, we're going the right path, right? Very diverse, a lot of independents, right? So the yellow ones are, let's say, center-right traditional political parties, and the purple and the, let's say, and the blue ones would be social democrat, center-left parties, and all the rest are independents. So you say, okay, there's going to be a lot of negotiation there. You need 2/3 for getting something approved, right? What happened the next day? All of the independents, all of them that presented themselves as independents, they've moved exactly to the left of the Communist Party and acted as one single body. So the problem is that the center, we usually in the Chilean history, we move from center-left to center-right, from 45 to 55. That's the usual, pendulum going in the political system. And the central virtually disappeared. The traditional center party in Chile, which is the Christian Democrat, they got one seat. This is the biggest, party at the Congress. They got one seat, and same electoral system. And all of the independents, they all move here, right? All the same colors will move here. So, the green line represents 2/3. So you really did not need to negotiate with the Social Democrat, neither the center-right. You just have the votes for everything, okay? How anomaly was the result of the election? Well, purple, you have the center left, and the blue is the center right, and all the others were independents. However, if you go to the same amount of members at the Congress at the lower house, that is the watershed, the division, right, the cleavage between left and right. This is prior to the election. This is the 2017 election, which is within our historical pattern. And you say, well, so the pendulum changed. But what happened is that we have another election, even a presidential election after the election of the conventionals. And what happened? Exactly the same. We return to the historical pattern as having like half center-left, half center-right. So the anomaly of this was quite explicit. What started to happen? The behavior of this so-called independents. When a lot of them, they run, I'm not making this up, but they run in costumes of Pikachu. Yeah? So there was the Pikachu aunt, right? And she dressed herself the entire convention as the Tia Pikachu, right? Another guy, did his campaign in a dinosaur costume, and he spent the whole convention within this costume. Some guys voting, because everything was done by Zoom or whatever, in the shower. Another guy who based his whole campaign in being a terminal in cancer disease. Used to be, they realized at the 3 or 4 weeks later that it was a scam. He was completely healthy, and he has to step down, actually. So a lot of things start to confuse people about the behavior, how they evaluate the behavior of the convention. So at the very beginning, it was very common, a lot of people with a lot of confidence there, and suddenly start dropping, and when February of this year, when the text was actually going out, things shifted. And the popularity was going down, but they say, no problem, we're going to discuss social rights at the very end of the convention, and that would change the tendency. Well, that didn't happen. So this is about a month prior to the election. I know it's in Spanish, but I wanted to get the real source. So how about pension? This was one of the big flags, big issues for the riots and the social unrest. Do you agree that with your pension, it's your own, right? Or does it have to be state-owned? And 95% of people say no, and of course the convention went with the 6% option. Same thing happened with health, right? No, I'd rather have only a single public system, but only 14 of the people want that. So in every single issue, they start kind of departing of what people actually wanted. This is the plurinational thing. This is in August, and say, do you buy this? Do you realize? Do you embrace this idea of being a plurinational country? Well, at that time was only 22% support, and this is one of the basic key elements of the convention. So same thing happened with the this mixed